All right, let's dive into your body's ultimate command center, the nervous system. I mean, this is the high-speed, super intricate network that's responsible for pretty much everything you think, feel, and do. It really is the information superhighway that makes you, well, you. So let's get plugged in and see how this whole thing works. But really, think about it for a second. How does it all work? How does a simple thought, like I should pick up that cup of coffee, actually travel from your brain all the way down your arm and turn into the physical action of your hand reaching out and grabbing it? That's the big question we're going to unravel in this explainer. So, to figure that out, we've got to zoom out first. We need to look at the big picture, the system's overall structure. You know, it's kind of like looking at a map of the entire country's highway system before you focus in on one single road. Now, this whole ridiculously complex system can actually be broken down into two main parts, and these two parts are always talking to each other to run the show. You've got the central nervous system, or CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. The easiest way to wrap your head around this is to think of the central nervous system, that's your brain and your spinal cord, as the main headquarters, or HQ. This is where all the big decisions get made. And the peripheral nervous system, well, that's the massive network of cables, all the other nerves that spread out and connect HQ to every single part of your body, constantly sending messages back and forth. So this huge network from the command center in your brain all the way to your fingertips, it's all built from one single fundamental unit. So let's zoom way in to the microscopic level and meet the real star of the show, the neuron.
And this is it. This is a neuron, the basic cell of the nervous system, and it is perfectly built for its job. You see those little branches? Those are dendrites, and they're like antennas that receive signals. The main cell body processes those signals, and then this long tail, that's the axon, zips the new signal on its way.
And you've got to understand, this is a one-way street. Information comes in through the dendrites, gets sorted out in the cell body, and then a new signal gets fired down the axon. And see that coating on the axon? That's absolutely crucial. It's called the myelin sheath, and it's a fatty layer that acts just like the rubber insulation on an electrical wire, making the signal travel way, way faster. So how fast are we actually talking here? Well, some of these nerve impulses can travel at an absolutely astonishing 250 miles per hour. That is how you're able to react almost instantly to something, like yanking your hand away from a hot stove. But here is where it gets really wild. Neurons don't actually touch each other. Nope, there's a tiny, tiny gap between them. So, how in the world does the signal get from one neuron to the next? This, my friends, is where the real magic happens.
This little gap is called a synapse. And yeah, it's incredibly small, but for an electrical signal, that's like trying to jump the Grand Canyon. It just can't do it on its own. It needs a little help.
So what happens is this kind of cool three-step chemical dance. First, the electrical signal zips down the axon and arrives at the very end. That arrival triggers step 2, the release of these special chemicals into that synaptic gap. And third, those chemicals float across the gap and lock into the next neuron, which kicks off a brand new electrical signal in that one. It's an amazing little relay race.
And these special chemicals, they have a name you probably heard before: neurotransmitters. Think of them as the chemical mail carriers of the nervous system. They're absolutely essential for making this whole information superhighway work, by turning an electrical signal into a chemical one, and then right back into an electrical one millions and millions of times a second.
Okay, so we get the messengers now. Let's zoom back out and head back to the headquarters, the brain, and see how billions, literally billions of these neurons all work together to create the most complex object in the known universe. So, the biggest part of your brain is the cerebrum. And it's not just one big blob of tissue. It's actually divided up into 4 main sections, or lobes, and each one has its own list of specialized jobs. Right up front, you've got the frontal lobe. That's the CEO of your brain. It handles all the planning, personality, and complex thinking. Then there's the parietal lobe, which is like your sensory input department, processing things like touch and temperature. The temporal lobes on the sides, they're all about hearing and understanding speech. And finally, the occipital lobe, way in the back, is your dedicated visual processing center, turning the raw data from your eyes into the world you see around you.
And what's just mind-blowing is how efficient this organ is. The brain is an absolute powerhouse. It runs the entire show, every second of every day, while only making up about 2% of your total body weight. That's incredible.
So, this information superhighway is amazing when it's all working smoothly. But what happens when there's a problem?
What happens when there's a roadblock or a damaged cable or just a total communication breakdown? Well, a really clear example of this is multiple sclerosis, or MS. In this condition, the body's own immune system kind of gets confused, and it mistakenly starts to attack that critical myelin sheath we talked about, that insulation on the axon. And when that insulation gets damaged, it messes up the signals, disrupting or slowing them down and causing all sorts of communication errors.
And you can see the damage right here, clear as day. On top, you've got a healthy nerve, all wrapped up nice and insulated. But below it is a nerve that's been affected by MS. You can see how that protective myelin has been worn away, exposing the raw nerve fiber and causing those signals to get scrambled. And MS is just one example. So many other common disorders that you've heard of, things like Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, stroke, and Alzheimer's, are at their very core problems with the nervous system's intricate wiring and communication.
And this brings us right back to that tiny little synaptic leap. Understanding what happens in that gap, that chemical handoff between neurons, is just fundamental. It is the absolute key to figuring out not only how our bodies work, but also the root causes of so many diseases and, importantly, the drugs that we design to treat them.
Which leaves us with one last kind of huge question to chew on. If everything that makes us who we are, every memory, every feeling, every single thought you've ever had, if it all boils down to these tiny electrical signals and chemical leaps across microscopic gaps, what does that really say about the nature of consciousness itself? It's something to think about.